So, hi Mayu, thank you for
Hi.
joining us all the way from Japan. So, how are you doing?
Great, great.
Are you like working on projects or is this the
I have several projects in development, but I'm not shooting yet. It's hoping to shoot soon.
Oh, okay, great. So, we are really excited to have you join us
Mhm,
today to speak about Intimate Stranger.
mhm,
So, and Intimate Stranger is one of our showcase title in July, and it's airing on CinemaWorld in all Asian territories except Japan. So,
mhm,
it's a film that definitely has intrigued our curation team greatly, and we do have some burning questions to get to about the film. So,
mhm,
CinemaWorld is our first and only pan-Asian international movie service. So,
mhm,
we curate box office hits and critically acclaimed like award-winning films, film
mhm,
festival films from around the world for our Asian audiences in Indonesia, Taiwan, Singapore, India, Philippines, and more. So
mhm,
this July, Cinema World is having our Asian Filmmaker Spotlight. So to
mhm,
showcase award-winning filmmakers, Asian filmmakers like yourself. And
mhm,
of course, at the same time, we also have a brand extension called Cinema Shot. And
mhm,
it's we share this vision of like fostering emerging Asian filmmakers,
mhm.
showcasing their short films in on our
Okay.
global platform. Yeah,
Mhm,
so we definitely want to keep this evolving conversation within the Asian filmmaking space alive.
mhm,
And such an in-depth interview with someone like yourself, I think would be great insight
mhm,
for both our audience of film enthusiasts and budding filmmakers. So
mhm.
yeah, so we're so happy to have you here to
Great,
talk to
thank
us
you.
about your 2022 film, Intimate Stranger.
Okay, I'll just jump right into the questions.
Mhm,
So, the first one, Intimate Stranger is set in post-COVID Japan.
mhm, mhm.
So why this particular setting and how did it shape the narrative, and your writing?
Oh, actually, the film originated long before COVID, the pandemic. Actually, I've been writing for several years, and the original story was already in place about this, single mother looking for her son, is approached by this young scammer. That story was already in place, but when we got the money to shoot the film, it was 2020. So the COVID just started. So we basically reset the story in the pandemic time. And I it was a bit of a challenge in terms of a logistical shooting, but I think it sort of added, more dimension to the story because the story originally was more indoor story about these two people's relationship, like transforming within this very enclosed space. But because of pandemic, the outside world became even more dangerous and menacing. So their isolation become even more acute in some ways. So
Mm.
it kind of almost precipitated this intense intensity of their, sort of relationship and isolation.
This isolation perhaps was it something that sort of was already in like a theme that you were interested in looking to show in the original story, or is it just something that came with the post-COVID narrative?
Um, it was not particularly about the pandemic to begin with. I wanted to portray this intense relationship between Asian mother and their, sons, because one of the inspiration of the story started much earlier on. I studied filmmaking in US, and I've been away from home for like 14 years. So I was very curious about how, I'm not sure about Singapore, but like in Japan and at least probably in Korea, like mothers tend to kind of, dote on their firstborn sons. I guess it's Asian culture. So I was interested in this kind of obsession, the mother's obsession towards the
Mm.
son, because the relationship between mother and daughter is so different from mother and son, especially in Asia, because the Asian mothers kind of really fixate on the firstborn son. So this woman who's kind of lost her firstborn son is really like obsessing on finding the surrogate son. So that's the kind of crux of the story that I originally wrote. But because the pandemic happened, I reset the story in the pandemic time. So that backdrop of a pandemic made their, isolation even kind of more acute.
It's interesting that you mentioned that this was your focus, the almost obsessive toxic relationship between mother and son. But then there's also this insertion of the scammer and the scamming cases in Japan that we found out that it's actually very common. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did that bleed together into this story?
Because as I said, I lived in US for so long and in Europe as well, that I was very curious about this grandma scam, the telephone scam. Usually the grown, men call up their, aging, elderly mother, usually much older than this woman that I'm portraying, usually mothers in their 70s and 80s, the sons who could possibly like a 30 or 50 call up saying, oh, I lost company's money, or I'm in trouble, please cover me, send me money. And that kind of a scam has been rampant still now for many, many years in Japan. I'm not sure about other countries, but I thought it was very almost a reflection of this mother and son relationship, because it's never a daughter. I never heard like a daughter scam, because they won't spend money on the daughter, but the even the elderly mother will be willing to send money to this grown-up sons. Is kind of reflection of this society, which, yeah, it's a kind of patriarchal society where they value their firstborn sons, especially. So the parents are willing to put up money for their sons. So I'm sort of trying to do sort of a critique of that, because women are usually the ones who are being preyed, like the mothers. So this woman kind of take that back on herself and, try to scam the scammer. It sort of has a feminist take in some ways, but because she's so desperate to get the surrogate sons, that she scammed the scammers, because they're usually the guys who are scamming. In this case, the boy who's scamming, doesn't know mother's love, so he's kind of prone to this motherly affection in some ways, that he's doing the scamming because he wants to feel the mother's love, vicariously.
I think there's a lot of nuance in this particular story, because how you portray this obsessive mother who's also perhaps a victim also of the loss of her own child, and a scammer who, as you said, doesn't know the mother's love and is craving that and is perhaps therefore doing this also. Then is there a clear villain or hero in this story?
It's very complex because they're both victims and offenders, and the both of them, the main character, the mother character, and the scammer character, they're both kind of victim and offender at the same time. It's not really a clear-cut villain.
What do you want their takeaway to be?
One of the reasons I did this film was, I'm not sure about the other Asian countries, but in Japan, it's hard to make a films about middle-aged women as protagonists. And it took me a while to raise money because, we have more female directors and female filmmakers, but people who put in money, like investors, are all men. So they usually say, oh, we don't want to watch like a middle-aged woman protagonist. We want like a young woman. And especially this story was about this strange erotic relationship with this, older woman and a younger man. So actually, a lot of the investors had the problem with it because they're men. So they wouldn't have any problem if it's otherwise. So I think what I wanted to get across to the audience was that there are so many interesting stories around like women over 35. I want people to sort of appreciate like the women are still women over 35. Actually, the same goes with the actresses. They have a really hard time here because if they're over 35, the only roles they get is the good mother and good wife and nothing interesting. So what I would like to do is to make more interesting film about women, over 35 and the audience to sort of get used to.
I think just personally, this story really resonated with me. I think it's really brilliant that there are such narratives about women out there, because it's very difficult to get stories of women being like other forms of feminism, I guess. Something cruel, something evil, something twisted. So why do you choose to have this erotic relationship between mother and child?
There's sort of a sexual tension between these two characters, but they never really have sex or anything. But I guess it's a little bit of an incestuous dimension to this. But in Japanese family in general, a lot of times fathers are absent. So the mothers spend so much time with their children. Sometimes the mother like fixate on their son, almost like a surrogate lover in some ways.
Yeah.
They kind of groom them to be their ideal men. I mean, the sexless marriage is one of the big problems. Now here, once they have kids, they don't have sex, and so they go for the extramarital affairs and whatnot.
This film, Intimate Stranger, felt like a kind of protest to against all these stereotypes and boxes that the society and culture try to fit them in, which I found it very interesting in terms of your own filmmaking journey, because you grew up in Japan and then you studied abroad for such a long period of time. I think you mentioned in previous interviews that this experience or this journey gave you a bird's eye view of Japan's society from the outside. So kind of spurred you to be more bold in exploring such topics. And I realized that in a lot of your interviews, there's always an underlying thread which you echo, which is curiosity. You are always constantly curious about certain phenomenons, as well as try to challenge some form of stereotypes. So maybe you could share with us, like, how does curiosity help guide the development of an observation into subsequently a filmmaking project?
I actually make documentaries as well as fiction. So I'm always kind of curious about what's going on around the world and around me. That's one of the reasons. Actually, I made two films relating to pandemic. It's about the four women surviving in the post-COVID Tokyo, but the four women of different generations and backgrounds are played by one actress who plays from this like a 20-year-old sex worker to the 40-year-old blind woman. It's kind of a wide spectrum. The reason why I did that film was because I was really interested. The pandemic time is the only thing that people could relate to all over the world, because it's a kind of a disaster that, everybody experienced. Nothing like that ever happens in the world normally. Japan has a lot of earthquakes, so a lot of the disasters are usually very topical. But pandemic is something that everybody on the planet pretty much experienced. So I thought, I should make a film about this, what's going on right now, because, everybody can relate to it, all over the world. So that sort of stems from my curiosity, really comes from being a documentarist.
Speaking of your documentary background, you did also mention that your DP for this film, Intimate Stranger, was also has a documentary background as well.
Oh yeah, Tsuji-san is a documentary, originally from documentary, background.
So like, why documentary? Why documentary rather than a narrative?
I don't see any border between documentary and fiction. I studied, fiction at the NYU grad film, and then I came back, made the first feature, which is a fiction, but then I went to the documentary. It kind of made me realize that in fiction as well as documentary, it's about observing people, how you just kind of observing how people behave. And a lot of people think the documentary is just about recording what's going on, but it's actually directing. In fiction, you direct actors, but in documentary, it's more like directing real people. So you sort of ask them right question at the right time, or ask them to go to certain place with them and see what happens, like to kind of figure out the chemical reaction between this person and the environment or the people they're interacting with. So it's a very similar, for me, it's almost the same in a way that you're observing about people and how they behave. It's a little bit trickier with documentary because you're dealing with the real people that might change their life. They might say, no, please don't shoot us. That happened so many times before. So you gotta persuade them. So there's that difference, but the principle is the same. And I like working with a documentary DP because they have an eye for capturing the moment, like capturing the performance as if it's like a documentary, like it's really happening in front of you. One of my favorite director is John Cassavetes, American, author, and he's an actor, and he's known for like focusing on actors' performance because that's what's most important in fiction. So with the documentary cameraman, you can do something like that where you kind of focus on the performance rather than, composing the image.
In your Screen Daily interview, you did mention that from your filmmaking influences, you like to capture the small dramas of ordinary people. Style, it really sounds like you want the audience to see the world through your eyes, unfiltered, spontaneous, rather than rehearsed and just played out on screen. So how has that changed, or rather influenced your own documentary style? Your own directorial style?
Actually, I don't improvise everything, but when I'm shooting, when I'm preparing, I do a lot of rehearsals, especially with the Intimate Stranger. I did like a one rehearsal, like through rehearsal with the Asuka Kurosawa, but she's very veteran, so she didn't want to do too many rehearsals. But with the Fuji Kamiya, who's a younger actor, I wanted him to really get in touch with the characters. So we had the acting coach to train him. So in rehearsals, you explore like what's behind the script. So, and with the other film, the She's Me, I'm Her, actually I rehearse a lot with the actors, and I created the script together with the actors. You have a main storyline, and you have sort of the script, but then once you start rehearsing, you change the lines, because sometimes, actors say, oh, I can't say lines like this. And usually their instinct is right because they're in the character. So it's easier for them to really say as a character. So I change the lines. So, or we think about the situation, what's more feasible in this situation, and then they're bringing some ideas. Sometimes my camera person will bring in some ideas. So, script is sort of like a blueprint of the film. You have the basic storyline and ideas, but you kind of flesh it out with the actors and the camera person and art directors, and everybody kind of puts in. So in that sense, sorry, maybe I'm not answering the question right in the right way, but it's sort of like a documentary. You sort of, bringing people's different elements together and construct the film.
Sorry, I think it's quite interesting about how you're talking about documentary firstly, because you compared it with fiction and you said they are like, it's very much like fiction or narrative films. Do you think there's some sort of construction that goes behind the performances in documentaries too? I guess the word performance itself is really quite perhaps telling. It's a documentary, perhaps you expect it to be as you see it and you take it as you see it, but do you think there is some kind of performativity that goes behind it as well?
Yeah, in a way, because once you turn the camera on someone, they are you can't really be your ordinary self, you
Yeah.
sort of change. Actually, I did this film, documentary film called Alone Again in Fukushima, which is about the man who remained in nuclear zone with the animals
Yeah.
for 8 years. He remained there since March 11th, so it's more longer. But I followed him for about 8 years until the end of Tokyo Olympics. So in that particular film, the situation, the storyline is almost beyond fiction. It's gonna take millions of dollars to recreate no man's land, and this guy living with this animal is just very surreal. But he has been captured and in a lot of documentaries and a lot of films made about him, and so he had always something to say. I'm not necessarily saying that he's performing, but in documentary as well as fiction, but especially in documentary, they have to have something that they want to get the message across. So in this guy's case, the reason why he stayed there with the animals is he's kind of was protesting against, this nuclear power that they, just because the accident happened, why do we have to kill all the animals and desert our homeland? So he had this point that he wanted to get across. So, the subjects usually have something to say to the world.
So, I mean, now that a lot of your films are really based about Japan, and what do you think helps a story, maybe like such a localized story as you have most of your movies are about, what do you think helps a story like that travel beyond borders, beyond Japan, so that different audiences can, resonate with it?
Right. It's a kind of a tricky question because when you try to be so-called universal, it becomes very bland and not so interesting. So, Asia has such a very rich, local cultures that could be exotic to people in the West. So there's the element, you need to have something that people can relate to universally, but then it could have like a localized flavor, so to speak.
On top of like telling the story itself, you also tell a story for yourself as a filmmaker, because you do mention about the difficulties you have with funding as well as production realities as well. So, a lot of filmmakers definitely want to know, like, how do you continue pursuing such unique perspective despite having, this kind of logistical as well as funding difficulties during your filmmaking process?
Oh, I don't think I resolved that question. I'm still having a lot of difficulties, and in fact, I think there are more funding in Asia, and a lot of the filmmakers now in Japan are collaborating with, like, say, people in Taiwan, sometimes in Philippines, because there are more resource outside Japan. Japan, like, economy is kind of going down. Yen is so weak right now, so the dollar is so strong. So, and I feel that like a lot of the Asian countries, like especially South Asian countries, have like younger, stronger, vibrant, more film industry, like Philippines and Singapore and Malaysia. They have like the film industry is like kind of blossoming, whereas we have an old film industry, but it's kind of declining. That's what it feels like.
Do you work with Southeast Asian or South Asian filmmakers yourself?
I haven't worked with them, but I know them because I met them in the film festivals. And actually, Intimate Stranger was invited to this Vietnamese film festival called Da Nang Film Festival. And I met a lot of Vietnamese filmmakers there. And Vietnam is one of the countries that's really, becoming very, going up in the film industry. A lot of young filmmakers making interesting films.
You also did mention in your previous interview, it was a low budget, quick and dirty way of filmmaking for yourself. So how do you think that previous experience of that has benefited you to making a film during the pandemic because all the resources are so tied up?
So I incorporate the pandemic because I thought it serves the story, and they also, the government dished out some money for artists during the pandemic, so a lot of people were able to make films with that grant, and I did one with the other film. I'm still struggling and like trying to raise money. It's always a big question. It takes forever. It's actually harder now than pandemic, I think, because people are now so busy with so many productions. Actors are all like, oh, we're booked till like 2026, and
Oh,
so it's I think it's becoming a little bit tougher now because now all the production's running. So you always have to figure out like a different ways of raising money. Like I'm trying to co-produce with people, European investor, or try to find like a resource outside. Now the Asian American filmmakers are doing very well in Hollywood, and the Asian stories are, gaining interest. So I have those, but you know, it's much harder in a way because it's such a bigger budget. Because trying to make a film in the US is always cost so much more money. So it's taking a little bit of a time trying to do it, but I'm right now trying to do like a smaller thing. You have to tailor the story to the what you're capable of doing. So, but then you try to be inventive with the limited resource you have.
Are these limitations the reason why you chose to have only one actress for She Is Me, I Am Her?
It's not so much the limit, it's more about the first off, I made the first film, did very well in the film festivals. And the producer said, can you make a feature film with Nahana, who's the main actress? So I thought about, oh, maybe I can do 3 other short films with her. And if the same actress plays different characters, then it's sort of saying that actually the title suggests like, this woman is like me. So it kind of emphasizes the fact that this same woman's playing different women means like all these different women are part of me. So it's sort of like making that statement. Ordinary housewife to a sex worker to a blind woman, they have something in common with me that not necessarily you don't think in the real world like, oh, you have anything in common with these women, but they have something that they can relate to.
so do you have any advice for, I think, young filmmakers whose dreams are as big as yours, but the reality is just as harsh?
Oh shit, I'm still struggling. So it's hard for me to say, but I feel like the South Asian and other Asian countries have much more resource in some
Okay.
ways to tap on the Japanese film industry doesn't. So I think there's a lot of avenues to explore, and there's so much rich culture that could be used for like different, films. For example, I'm doing something about shamanism in the south of Japan, which is also like a lot of shaman stories right now in horror films and stuff like that. You can use like a rich native culture that doesn't exist in other parts of the world for storytelling, I think.
So are there any like particular spots, particularly like destinations that you want to shoot in your upcoming projects?
I have about a couple projects in the US. I have another one in Okinawa, which is sort of south of Japan,
Yeah.
closer to Taiwan actually, because it's like all the way in the south. I like to work in, some other Asian countries like Philippines and Vietnam. Actually, I have one short film that's going to be screening in Japan Cuts in New York at the Japan Society. I did the short film with Stephanie Aria, who's a Filipino actress from Plan 75. It's about this young Filipino woman, trying to protect this mysterious package in this very dangerous night city of Tokyo. It was shot it overnight, and with the Xperia smartphone. It was a commission work, like you have to shoot the short film with a smartphone, which it was a big challenge because I've never done it, and especially we shot it one night in a very low light situation, so it was a bit of a challenge because although the phone's getting better because it's like so dark, we had to hold like a battery right to like keep it visible. But then the good part about using a smartphone is like you can do guerrilla style. With the smartphone you can get away, and you can explore like interesting angles because it's so small. So that was kind of interesting project to do.
I mean, thank you for sharing with us your experience, because I think a lot of our filmmakers really would appreciate your honesty and how you are also struggling through the process of this as well. So this July, I think I mentioned earlier, we are having a Asian Filmmaker Spotlight. We have a US-China film, a Sri Lankan film, and then as well as your film from Intimate Stranger in the spotlight. So thank you so much for spending your time with us.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, have a good day. Bye.
Good day. Bye. Hello, the audience of CinemaWorld. Intimate Stranger will be streaming on July 14th at 9 p.m. at the Singaporean time on CinemaWorld, so please check it out.